There we go.
Okey-doke.
So since
All
you have an early morning thing, why don't you do your presentation, and whoever comes in, comes in.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, we'll see if the flights are actually going to happen tomorrow morning. The plane for DCA is coming in theoretically tonight at 11 o'clock. So we'll see if it actually makes it in or not.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, all right. So this is a updated introduction to hard times tokens and the life and times of Dr. Feuchtwanger. I had given this presentation at one of the ANAs a number of years ago. I don't remember which one now.
Philly.
It was Philly?
Yeah, I got pictures of the display.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So I have been, through the wonders of the internet, been able to do a lot more research and have expanded pretty nicely on the topic. So I figured people hadn't heard this stuff in a while, and it was worth doing an updated presentation. So come on, why are you not moving forward? All right, we'll do it this way. All right, so just for in terms of what we're going to cover tonight, a overview of why hard times tokens exist, the factors that played a role in them coming to be, the various variations, the general types of what the tokens were. So you had the political, satirical, merchants, and then script, which are obviously not coins, but they do fit within the series. And then a overview of who Dr. Feuchtwanger was, some of his background, and then I'm going to run through all of the various tokens that are associated with him, the ones that we are all pretty much familiar with, as well as a whole bunch of others that are associated with the series. Some that have been confirmed as being Feuchtwanger for sure, and others that all the evidence seems to suggest that it was. So anyway, why are there hard times tokens? This is a high level reason as to why, because the more you dig into it, the more complicated the issues become. But essentially, the series coincides with the Panic of 1837, which resulted in a 5-year-long depression. And there were a few reasons, primary or fundamental reasons why this happened. First, there was a battle between the supporters of the Second Bank of the United States, which was basically like the official bank of the U.S., which was led by Nicholas Biddle, the bank president, and then those who opposed the bank, and in fact opposed centralized banking in general, which was led by Andrew Jackson and then later Martin Van Buren. And there is a great book. I have a copy of this book. It's all of the collected letters of Nicholas Biddle, and in that book, he really gets into the nitty gritty of the reasoning for the downfall of the Bank of the United States. If I ever need to write a PhD thesis, I know where to go. But the other primary reason was the issuance of the Specie Circular. And basically, that was a presidential executive order by Jackson where you could no longer do land speculation by using a paper currency that was oftentimes not worth what the face value said. And there was a just rampant amount of counterfeiting, particularly out of Canada, that contributed to the panic. And what ended up happening was people were hoarding gold, silver, and copper, and then furthermore, most of the banks refused to transfer paper and turn it into gold and silver. So these were the high level reasons as to what caused this panic. But the other thing that was an issue was that the state chartered banks also really hated the Second Bank of the United States. So many of them were actually well funded. But at the same time, being traded at a discount, everyone took the Bank of the United States notes at face value, but basically every other bank had an issue with the public accepting their paper money as at face value. There's another really interesting book, and so I mentioned the counterfeiting issue, called A Nation of Counterfeiters. It came out maybe 10 years ago now. It is not a dry read. It is a very interesting read, all about the life and times of the various counterfeiters across the country. And it's actually really surprising how many of them were just over the border from where we are, up in Canada. So, like I said, I'm going to go over the three different types of primary token areas. The merchant tokens are good fors, the political and satirical tokens, and then the script and paper money. So, starting with script, these I was really fortunate. There was a pretty impressive auction recently from Heritage of some of the best examples of the political script or satirical script that I've ever seen. And unfortunately, I don't have unlimited money, so I wasn't able to get any of these things. But they all pretty much correlate to the times and make political statements about that were primarily anti-Jacksonian. I will say the Dr. Faustus a note that's in the upper, well, it's in my upper right-hand corner. That is often, well, it isn't just often. It is in fact a anti-Semitic script that basically plays on Jews being, known as moneylenders, and it's a very well-known note within the series. But the best known note is the Great Loco Foco Juggernaut note. It's just an absolutely beautiful banknote that captures so many aspects of what was going on at the time. So you may have some familiarity with the phrase Loco Focos. So the Loco Focos were basically radical Democrats. They were pro-democracy. They were pro-small r Republican. They were generally anti-slavery and very heavily anti-corporate monopolists. And their big issue was that they were completely opposed to centralized government-sponsored banking. So what was happening were a lot of federal dollars were being deposited into state banks or private banks, and these Democrats basically saw this as the government picking winners and losers by placing specie in these banks. That was a big part of their political agenda. And what ended up happening was in 1840, the Independent Treasury Act was passed, and that eliminated the government putting government dollars into those private banks, and eventually it resulted in the creation of the Federal Reserve System, obviously much later. And then just a point of interest, the Loco Foco name itself was associated with a brand of self-igniting friction matches. What had happened was there was a nominating convention at Tammany Hall, and you had a conflict between the Democratic Party regulars and then the more radical Loco Focos. And the regulars were attempting to shut down the convention by knocking out the gas lights. Sorry, cat is jumping in front of me here. By taking out the gas lights to try to end the evening, and the Loco Focos ended up using those matches to light candles so that the convention could continue. And they took that name on, and they actually there's a lot of argument as to how long that Loco Foco movement actually ran. Probably as late as 1870, but it is possible that you could argue that the movement more or less ended as soon as the Independent Treasury Act passed. But the thing that's really neat about this note is it just like I said, it captures so much of what was going on at the time. So you have the rag monster with the face of Van Buren on it, being led away by these dummies, basically. You have, another image of Van Buren being led by his predecessor, by Andrew Jackson. You have the reference to shin plasters in this note. It's a very interesting piece, and I'm sad I wasn't able to afford it. Would have been nice.
What did it go for?
I'd have to look it up, but none of them were cheap because they're all rare. But it's all there on the Heritage website under sold items. So there was also, we start to get into the political and satirical token series, and there are hundreds of these tokens. I just wanted a couple of representative samples that kind of capture the moment. The Mint Drop Loco Foco token is a pretty well-known token. It ties in obviously to everything I was just talking about. But then on the reverse, there's a reference to a Benton experiment. So Thomas Hart Benton was a U.S. senator who was basically like Jackson's right-hand man for a long time, and was a proponent of shutting down the Bank of the United States. Interestingly, he ended up splitting with the Democrats later on because he was very much anti-slavery. Even though he was a slave owner, he ended up coming to the conclusion that this wasn't right, and that he wasn't going to support the compromise, and so it led to him falling out with the Jacksonians and that sect of the Democratic Party. The May 10th token on the other side here, HT66, is also representative of the series. It shows the May 10th, 1837 date, which is when the specie circular was issued, when you could no longer purchase or speculate in federal property by using this paper money and having to pay for it in gold and silver. And then, of course, much like the Civil War token era, we also had lots of independent vendors that had their own tokens. I apologize, these are a little dark. They're my own pictures, and I don't have my own tokens. I don't have a very good rig to take pictures, but it's just a couple of really interesting examples. The John J. Adams one from Massachusetts, I've always personally really loved that token because of frankly, the pig on the obverse. I always thought it was great, and I was really happy to find this particular one that has a full strike on the cash for bristles on the side of the pig. Off usually that just doesn't show up at all. And then another one that folks may be familiar with is the TD Seaman, that New Jersey token. There's another variation of it where basically there were errors with the token, so they changed the die slightly and defaced it. So you have this T. Duseman token, which was used basically to salvage them so that they could still be used, but that wasn't how it was supposed to be marked. But again, much like the Civil War tokens, there was such a shortage of government money, of government copper, that and others, that folks issued these as good force. The talk isn't really to get too heavily into the series. There's a ton that I could talk about, but there's a lot of really good literature out there that talks about the series. Interestingly, the Rouleau books, I think, are out of print. I was doing the search for it earlier today, and I'm not seeing them still being issued. But the official Red Book guide for hard times tokens is pretty new. That's within the last few years. And that is readily available on Amazon. So now we start to move into Dr. Feuchtwanger. So Feuchtwanger was born in Germany in 1805, graduated in 1827 with his MD degree, and then shortly thereafter emigrated to the United States in 1829, and the literature typically just says lived in New York City, and that is true for the vast preponderance of his life. He did live in New York City, but I believe the way that it worked out is that he actually started in Philadelphia, and there are a number of reasons why that seems to be the case. So while he was in Germany, he was actually renowned as a successful duelist. He had 9 successful duels, which I suppose the success means you're not dead. There's an interesting story that basically only one time was he ever injured in a duel, and it was when there was a prince. They don't say who the prince was, but there was a prince that was not happy with how good of a duelist Feuchtwanger was, and so he apparently, after the duel was completed, hit him. Now, I don't know if he hit him with his gun or he slapped him really hard with a glove, old-timey style, but apparently that was the only time Feuchtwanger was injured in a duel, and was actually a winner 9 times. So he was a druggist, chemist, dealer in natural curiosities such as minerals, gems, preserved reptiles, and etc. And I highlighted and bolded etc. As you're going to see in a minute, this guy was a hustler, let me tell you. Over the course of his life, published a bunch of different books. A popular treatise on gems is probably the one that people are most familiar with. It's the most readily available, followed closely behind by the book Soluble Glass and all its applications. It's interesting to me, working at Alfred University, we actually have some of his books in our engineering library because of what he was publishing on as it related to soda lime silicate glass, which is your more traditional glasses, and production. So at some point I have to go into the rare book section and have them pull those for me because I want to see actual copies, though I do own the Gems book. He also published on fermented liquors. And then he did an interesting pamphlet on the mad dog or hydrophobia, so rabies, with all of its various symptoms, causes, and remedies. It's an interesting book that the National Science Foundation has a full scan of. I've never seen a copy in real life. And then he did a collection of American minerals, freshwater shells, fossils, coals, ores, and Indian relics. And there are a whole bunch of examples of these books out in the literature, out in the world. Many different issues of it, or they were published multiple times for the most part, other than the Mad Dog, as far as I can tell. So, as an example of his success in chemicals, these were auctioned recently at Heritage, and they came out of the Andy Harkness collection, and I could not afford them either. The silver one went for over $10,000, and the bronze went for just over $8,000.
Wow.
But my God, I'm kicking myself for not being able to get these things because they are representative of Feuchtwanger as the man. In terms of the things that he was doing in New York at that time, and exhibiting. He regularly exhibited. He gave talks all the time, and he published frequently. And these were just beautiful American Institute medals. So he's most well known in the numismatic space for what was referred to we refer to it primarily as German silver, but he did for a while refer to it as American silver, as any good immigrant would do, I suppose. Take on the American silver name. So what was what's mostly known is that in 1837 he petitioned Congress to replace copper in small U.S. coinage with the German silver or American silver alloy. And in the process of lobbying for that, he struck a large number of 1-cent pieces and a smaller number of 3-cent pieces. Ultimately, the German silver was rejected by the mint director, Robert Patterson, but also there was obviously heavy lobbying from the copper industry who did not want to see, that switch away from copper. Later in 1865, he restruck a lot of the, he's restruck the 1837 1-cent pieces. In fact, some of the most common varieties were probably struck in the 1860s rather than in 1837, as well as an 1864 3-cent token, which falls under the both the hard times and Civil War categories for collecting. But ironically, the mint did ultimately switch to an alloy of 75% copper and 25% nickel for U.S. coinage down the road. But Feuchtwanger was not able to profit from any of that, and eventually he died in 1876 at age 69. Here on the right is a one of his advertisements about selling a German silver. And I wanted to, I got to say, it's really amazing to me what you can find now in terms of genealogical records. You know, I go back through some of my older texts, and there is very little information about Feuchtwanger and his family. But I had a lot of success figuring out not only his wife and the daughters that were known, but he also had some other children that died relatively young. You had Oscar or Uriah Feuchtwanger, who died in Lower Merion, Montgomery, PA, at the age of 12. You had Charles Feuchtwanger, who lived less than a year, and then you had his son Joseph Washington Feuchtwanger, who lived into adulthood. He was 34 years old, or 33. I'm sorry, 33 years old, and was married. But he actually, Feuchtwanger, outlived everyone in his family except for his daughter Emma. The other thing that I thought was interesting was that up until recently, I had no evidence that Joseph and his wife Rosina had a child, and I was able to find an obituary for Maud Augusta Feuchtwanger, named after Joseph's mother, Augusta, who died in 1879 at just under the age of 7 years old from the scarlet fever. And it was obviously in our age of COVID and the COVID pandemic. It's interesting because they had effectively a 60-year world pandemic of scarlet fever, with extremely high fatality rates for children between the ages of 2 and 8. And I do wonder if that also was what caused the deaths of Charles and of Oscar. So the two daughters did live well into adulthood. Emma was the one who lived the longest, and she was the one who donated much of her father's collection. There was a large gem collection and other what would you call it? Ephemera, I suppose. It was all donated. Much of it was stolen. Most of it was broken up, and it doesn't really exist to this day. But they did support financially a number of Jewish causes in New York City, and she's also the only one that I have been able to find any kind of record as to where she's buried, and she is in Queens. So we're all familiar with the 1 cent. Well, maybe we're not, but mostly people are familiar with the 1 cent and 3 cent pieces. But there were also 2 Feuchtwanger store cards, and these represented his 2 addresses, which were 377 Broadway in New York and 2 Cortlandt Street. And he advertised his American silver, which was used to make all sorts of things. A lot of spoons. I found a lot of records indicating that he had some contracts with some spoon manufacturers, as well as other flatware, but he also advertised beer pumps, pillars, grates. I know they made candlesticks. So these are pretty rare tokens. I think they're both in the R7, R8 range. So you're talking, fewer than maybe 12 examples each. I have that lower token with the black gunk on it, unfortunately, and it came out of, I think, the Eliasberg collection. I don't have the tokens in front of me, but that one actually is my example. Now, that etc. I come back to that etc. Feuchtwanger seemed to be selling everything. He sold Christmas presents in case you're a small child and you want, toys for the amusement of lads and girls, which will sell on moderate terms, being now out of that line of business. Diamond cement for joining glass and china. The thing I like is the incorruptible teeth. And the thing that I like in this particular case is the door plates, bells, and pulls manufactured of German silver. But there were more ads. And in this one I love because you have the infallible toothache remedy, and right below it, you have jujube paste and marshmallow paste. So either your teeth felt good or your teeth felt like crap. And he could cover you in both ways. Like I mentioned, he did do a lot of talks. This is just one example of one of the talks that he presented with the College of Pharmacy in the city of New York. But another interesting one is it related to the books were, so in September of 1859, he apparently reached out to the New York Daily Herald and said, hey, I've been advertising a lot with you guys. I sent you a copy of my latest book, A Popular Treatise on Gems, and you guys didn't even seem to acknowledge the receipt of the book in your paper. Why am I paying all this money to advertise with you? And the New York Daily Herald didn't take too kindly to that and wrote a nice little response to Dr. Feuchtwanger, basically saying, piss off. So in addition to his own tokens, there are a lot of tokens that were struck in German silver. The R.E. Russell one, of course, uses the Feuchtwanger design on the obverse with the eagle, but these are just a few other examples that there is evidence to suggest that they purchased Feuchtwanger silver in making those tokens. But there are some that are really obvious. So this is the 25-cent, 1837 25-cent American silver piece. This also sold at auction recently from the Donald Partridge collection. I don't know if anyone's familiar with him, but he had a absolutely stunning collection of hard times, Civil War, and other tokens and medals, and it was just an outstanding collection. This one I would have loved to have purchased, but it didn't go for as much as I thought, but it still went into the very high six figures, so I did not end up procuring that. But for a long time, there was question as to whether or not this was actually a Feuchtwanger piece, but the use of the American silver, the very similar font use, and it seems highly likely that this was actually a Feuchtwanger issue, but there are only a couple of examples known. Now, ones that there's no definitive proof, but again, all signs point to yes, are the Philadelphia Corporation. They're the following two, the next two tokens, this one and the next one. Feuchtwanger did have close ties to Philadelphia early on, and it seems likely that he probably was involved in the striking of these tokens, particularly when you look at this one. There is a belief that the FS stands for Feuchtwanger silver on that 50-cent coin. These often do now get lumped in with the Feuchtwanger series. These are also extremely rare. There are only a couple of known examples of each one of these tokens, and they rarely come up for sale. The other larger Feuchtwanger coins, though, are more readily available, these 3-cent pieces. So the HT262, which is the one at the top, that is the one that has a New York State-like coat of arms on it. That was the only one that was for sure struck in 1837. However, the next token down, HT263, which has the large eagle on it, was also probably struck in 1837, but there are many varieties of that token, many of them in proof-like condition, many of them with ultra high relief.
Yeah, so
those were like
thing. We have so many involved people. I know the last week of June, the Wall Millers are going to Disney World, and it's a gift from Brian's parents. And they were originally going to go with them, but Brian's
Susie,
father had a
you're off of mute.
huge stroke
Susie?
just before mother really started to go downhill. So Jean has been going back and forth. Saint Jean, honest to God, that woman is amazing.
That's
Yeah.
so beautiful.
All right, good. All right, here we go. And then the last token is
Yeah, 'cause
definitely
Roger had to
the,
leave the skilled facility he was in because the insurance wouldn't pay for anymore.
Somebody call her up.
That always rocks.
yeah, Susie. Hey,
When you
Susie,
go through that, it's like, yeah, that's not good.
You-
So
you are off of
Susie.
mute.
he's
we-
at home.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Perfect. So the last one is the 1864 3-cent piece. That is the second most common out of the three varieties, but it is definitely obviously dated 1864, and it falls into the Civil War token series. Oops, get back in here. So then we get into the most widely known, the 1 cent varieties, and there are a lot of varieties. Some of them were struck in 1837. Some of them were struck much later. The first coin that I owned, actually, that got me into the Feuchtwanger series, I bought from Ursula. It was a variety 1A, obverse 1, reverse A, which is actually a somewhat rare token. It's a rarity level 5, I think, on a 9-point scale. And it's this first eagle. I don't know if you can see my arrow, or my cursor rather, but it's a very chunky looking eagle compared to some of the ones. It's a little more rough in design. In each one of these, there are slight variations in terms of the number of tail feathers that are physically on the ground, in the way that the denticles around the outside of the coin are struck, and then the reverses are what are also, they really give away the series. But that was the first token I had. I paid $10 for it, and it had a hole in it, and I have that coin to this day. I will not be putting it in a slab. It has to stay in the little cardboard flip with Ursula's handwriting on it. And then, as you can see, as we get lower down in these series, these are where we believe they were actually struck in the 1860s. The obverse 5 and obverse 6, they're the most common obverses of the series, and are usually the ones that are also in the best condition. Again, some of them they have their calling cards. So for instance, variety 5 has this bar that is above the date, but underneath the snake. There are variations in the shape of the snake's head, in the shape of the snake's tongue, the depth of the fork of the tongue, and then the way that the tail feathers of the eagle strike the ground. And then similarly on the reverse, you have a whole bunch of signs. So this is the reverse A. This was probably the earliest one, most that was struck. A very wide distribution of the word 1 across the back. There are only 12 berries in the wreath. In the later coins, there are 13 berries in the wreath. Some of them have slight variations in the so there's actually little stems on the wreath, and some of them look a little more claw-like than rounded off. And basically, you're just going through and you're looking for all these little telltale signs to tell you what the varieties are. And again, depending on the variety, that gets you into your rarity factor. So as you can see, we really start to get into some really nice beautifully struck reverses with reverse G and reverse H. It's interesting because the reverse G, really the primary difference is that you have a berry on the right side versus reverse H, where you have the extra berry on the left. None of the other reverses have 13 berries on it. So if you're looking at a Feuchtwanger 1 cent coin and it has 13 berries on it, chances are it's going to be one of the more common or most common varieties. Though there is I believe, one that is not. And then reverse I is the same situation. It's another really common reverse, usually in much better condition. And this one actually, the berry looks a little more like a stem than it does a berry. You can see it's a little flatter here. And then we start to get into these rarity factors. So the one that kind of throws it all into a loop is this 6A. There have been a couple of examples found where it has that later obverse, but it has the very early reverse on it. I've never seen one in real life, though I have seen one offered for auction, but I've only ever seen one. And generally speaking, the ones that are R5 and lower are available at your bigger coin shows or through online auctions. I have seen a few of the others at auction through like Heritage. I own a 3D, which is an R7, but that's my rarest of the 1 cent varieties. I actually, ironically, do not have a 6I. It's the most common one, but I keep looking for like one that really speaks to me. You know, I don't want to just get one because to get one to fill a hole. I'd really like to get a really beautiful example of one. I do have a gorgeous token that I actually have in here as the token on the front page of this presentation, which was previously owned by a BMax Mel, and they did mark it as a previous BMax Mel, and it's just a gorgeous golden toning. Some of them just have like more of a golden color to them than they do that silver look, and that's something I really look for when I'm looking at these 1 cent pieces. There are a couple of things though that I do want to throw out there. One is this encased postage. So you may see these in auctions. You'll see them occasionally on eBay. I owned one briefly, and then my father was angry because he found out that it wasn't actually a Feuchtwanger thing, and then he returned it to the auction house. In retrospect, I kind of wish I still had it. But these were actually probably made by Samuel H. Black. Samuel Black was a New York City-based electrotyper and gilder, and he actually issued 6 store cards of his own much later in the 50s and 60s. And it's funny because a lot of them, you can tell the gilding or the electrotyping wasn't done particularly well because the copper is coming off on a lot of examples of those tokens, but it is most definitely not. It just happens to use a Feuchtwanger eagle design on the reverse here of this encased postage. There was a whole sheet of these for sale many years ago, uncut of the just of these eagle pieces, and they appear very similar to the kind of artwork that Samuel Black did. He also did large copper and electroplated plates that were representative of like the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He had a George Washington themed one. There were a few other themed large copper plates, and there were some off metal ones as well. But again, not a Feuchtwanger piece. And then there are some contemporary folks that have made restrikes using that Feuchtwanger eagle design. I personally love that design. I don't own one of these pieces, but I give the Grove Minting Company some credit for using that design on their token. And that is all I got for today.
Thank you.
Here we go.
That was very nice. Yeah.